I'm happy to welcome Kimberly Del Greco. She's the Deputy Assistant Director of the Information Services Branch at the Criminal Justice Information Systems Division at FBI. And Lisa Mascolo, Managing Director of the U.S. Public Service for the Global Business Service at IBM. Ladies, come on up. Make yourselves at home.
Come over? Yeah.
Right here. I'm not scary, I promise.
I don't know about that.
Oh, now. Ladies, thank you very much for joining me. A culture for cross-agency innovation. This is something, Kimberly, that you live every day because you're interacting with law enforcement organizations all across the Justice Department. What are the keys that you have found to facilitating that in an organization like a federal agency that is very well known for its cylinders of excellence, I think, is the best term that I've heard used to describe it?
Our focus is to continually evolve the systems. We have 18,000 law enforcement agencies, 60,000 gun dealers that we service every day. It's important to us to continue to look at the technology and incrementally evolve that technology. We have several initiatives on board today, but we also have it's an advisory policy board, and it's a community effort that we have with the state and local law enforcement and tribal community, and we lean to them. What services do they need? So I think that helps strengthen it. Mm-hmm. We're not telling them what to do. They're not, we have a partnership with them, and that allows us to improve the systems and support them.
So your interactivity issue also is not just horizontal with your fellow agencies across, or bureaus across the Justice Department. It's also, you're also interacting with DOD organizations, you're interacting with DHS organizations everywhere, and then you also have this vertical with the state local organizations too.
Yeah.
How are those different? How are those interactions different, and how are they similar?
So the difference is that the relationship we have with DOD, DHS, the Department of State, and the intel community is to ensure that we're accessing each other's systems, that our algorithms complement each other, and that we're keeping up to date with technology in step with each other. So we're delivering a service level to those customers that are on the street every day, mm-hmm. and keeping the citizens safe. Yeah.
Lisa, the culture idea, we've talked about this a number of times before. What's changing? What's the trend line look like? Is it going in a positive direction? Is it neutral? Is it trending in a direction that maybe we don't like? What do you see?
I think, culture is a challenge no matter where you go. And for me, when I think about, are we on or not?
You can share it.
Hi. Culture is a challenge, I think, no matter where you go, whether you're inside the government or outside the government. And if you think about organizations sort of in three strata, there's the guys at the top who sort of set the tone at the top. There are the people in the middle, and then there are the younger people who are energetic, aspirational, and really have things that they want to get done. I think the key to the culture is that middle tranche, because those are the people who they receive the demands from the top, they receive the energy and the aspirations from the younger people, and it's that frozen middle, I think, frankly, where culture change gets stopped. And we have to do a better job of syncing up what I like to call the rhetoric and the reality. When the tone at the top is good, when the actions don't mirror what it is people want to get done in terms of culture, it's a real challenge, whether it's inside government or not. I mean, culture is what people do, and that sort of middle tier who's charged with dealing with this and dealing with this, that's a real challenge. And I think we do a decent job in some places, but consistently that's a place where I think we need to work to understand how to get that middle to adopt culture.
So you use a term there, you said culture is what people do, and it makes me think that maybe I'm approaching this exactly from the wrong direction. I'm thinking about how culture feeds information technology and transformation. And I think I'm doing it wrong. I think if culture is what people do, if that's ultimately what delivers the service that one of your stakeholders needs, or the citizen needs, or the internal customer at an agency needs, then I'm doing it backwards. I bet you I'm not the only one, am I? that's doing it backwards.
No, you're not. And it is the action, and it's changing slowly.
What's
the mindset.
changing it, do you think? Is it somebody up here says you all should be doing it this way, and maybe demonstrating a good reason, not just saying do it, or is it coming from the bottom, or is it
I think it's both.
all the way
I think it's both. And, it's having that strategy and the goals for technology and the mission and the process, but also it's what's happening on the streets and what's happening at the lower level, and taking that middle ground and evolving them and bringing them to an understanding of what their desires are to make it better, the mission better.
So we know all about the challenges that different organizations have had about being willing to share their data, and Suzette mentioned even within an organization, it doesn't even occur to some people. I don't think it's malicious. I think just some people don't realize they might have something that might be useful to somebody else. How did you go about coordinating that kind of idea and letting people know, you know what, something that you have that might seem very mundane and not particularly utilitarian might be very valuable to our colleagues over in this place?
We don't have that problem anymore. We did.
Yeah. How did you change that?
9/11 was a game changer for the U.S. government, and DOD, DHS, and FBI we have huge databases for our own mission, civil, criminal, and we want to make sure that we're keeping the privacy of the citizens. We want to protect the privacy. We want to make sure that we have security and structure in place, that we're accessing the records that we're allowed to access and for the right reasons. But we worked many years on interagency task forces to ensure that we're sharing biometrics, the biographics of all of our databases and data sets to complement each agency's mission.
Fortunately, the stumbling blocks that we still see in government, Lisa, are not happening as much in the law enforcement, intelligence communities, and so on. But that HHS story is unfortunate and probably more common than we would like it to be. What changes it in some areas where maybe the mission focus is still very important, but is not necessarily life-threatening today?
Well, I think in everything, especially in some of the HHS stories, lives are at stake. And I think one of the things that we've seen as a result of 9/11 is we did get our internal governmental act together with respect to a task force, right? Interagency task force to figure out how to share. I think we're at a point now with some of these evolutionary technologies where we can actually use the technology to become the task force, right? And to be able to look across those silos of data and actually, create a virtual task force, if you will, right? You don't actually have to worry about me sharing this data or you not getting the data because you can't see it. We actually can use the technology to look across those data sources and create, I like to think of it as a sort of a virtual task force, right? Mm-hmm. How do you bring that data together without actually having to worry about bringing people together for 2 years?
Yeah.
A cultural element that presents potentially a big challenge is what we talked about on the last panel with the idea that IT modernization never ends. I think there was, for a long time, Lisa, you've been observing this for a long time, and I think it is a recent development that we have started to think about that. I think there was a perception that if we did this and we refreshed this, then we were good for a while. And we're not ever going to be good for a while based on what we saw from Dr. Kelly's presentation this morning. These curves are crazy. How does that change the way that strategy should be built? And how does it change the way that people like Kevin and Tim, who were on the last panel, should be building those strategies and thinking about how they're educating the people that work for the Kimberleys of the world?
I would say two things. I think transformation, I think Andra said enterprise architecture is a dirty word. Actually, I agree. Transformation's a dirty word too because it implies a journey with an end, and this is about the constant struggle to, get ahead and stay ahead. So I think we need to think that way. The other key for me is to be thinking, and we have a responsibility, I think, in the contractor community as well, to think smaller, smarter, faster, cheaper, right? As a taxpayer, I would prefer that the government spend less money on stuff. We need to think smaller, smarter, faster, cheaper. We need to be more agile. We need to teach no longer waterfall. We need to teach our people about agile. Some of our clients want to do, fixed price agile, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that yet. But we really do need to think about this idea of continuously evolving in an environment, in a culture where risk-taking, failing fast, and I understand that in some missions failure is not an option, but we've got to incubate in a way that risk-taking becomes part of what we do, and getting to an understanding as to whether or not that risk was a good one or a bad one to take rapidly.
Is one of the cultural challenges that you ran into, Kimberly, in the law enforcement community, the fact that those concepts that Lisa just laid out, they're pretty standard operating procedure in the business world. I'm not sure that's the way that law enforcement organizations at any level have thought about the way that they do business. We have to think about how to be smaller, smarter, faster, cheaper. Is that a transformation that's happening, or is it something that you see happening in the future? Where do you think the law enforcement community, not necessarily specifically the FBI, is in that journey?
They're thinking about it.
Yeah?
Yeah, through our relationships that we have with the state and local law enforcement, we support their business. They use our systems every day. And so we've talked to them about the agile development, the continual improvement of their systems, no waterfall system, hiring the new college graduates that have safe training and know how to develop in an agile environment. The challenge comes when local law enforcement has to complement our development of our systems. So we want to make sure that we have a good relationship with state and local law enforcement, DOD, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of State. We want to make sure our systems aren't getting too far ahead of each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where the communication comes in.
That strikes me as just an incredible balance to have to maintain, mm-hmm. because I mean the number of stakeholders there is limitless, it seems, and you're right. I hadn't thought of that, but as you describe it, you can't get too far ahead of somebody else, or they're eliminated, and they're not able to derive the value from you that you're there to provide.
Yeah.
How do you build that strategy when you're not able to just go at your own pace?
Well, we have a strong relationship with the state and locals, industry, with the private sector. So we definitely we know where we want to be, where we want to go in technology. We definitely know how we want to incrementally evolve. So communicating that out to the stakeholders is critical. It gives them a framework and a strategy for themselves in their local agency to be able to complement what we're doing at the broader, bigger government level. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lisa, I have another word to add to the list of dirty words that we seem to be constructing. We started with enterprise architecture, and you suggested that we add transformation, and I would suggest that we add innovation, which is in the title of this segment, because I'm not sure that, it's impossible to define, obviously, but I'm not sure that we always know it when we see it. Is that knowable, and what do you see? If we don't know it, then how do we define and decide how to build a culture of innovation?
That's a fascinating question. I usually hate when people say, well, that's a great question. I think it does obviously come all the way back to the cultural point, and I like the idea of a common ground in culture change, whether you want to call it has to be a culture of innovation or a culture of risk-taking, fail fast, whatever it is. I think when you have that common ground and you can define it in more specific terms other than innovation, I agree with you. It's sort of too broad of a term. Everybody uses it. It becomes ubiquitous, and therefore it really doesn't have any meaning. I think if we think about culture change as it relates to the mission, right? I suspect we don't know a tenth or a hundredth of all of the things that law enforcement prevents, right? We hear about the things that get through, but I think the evidence of culture change in this environment probably is the amount of stuff that gets stopped from happening. And I think when you define the common ground of what we want the culture to be in some specific mission-oriented terms, it becomes a lot easier, and I agree with you, saying it's a culture of innovation. It's interesting, but it's not specific enough, and it doesn't give people enough guide rails.
Kimberly, you're nodding your head enthusiastically as
Yeah,
she
yeah.
makes
I mean,
those
it
points.
completely resonates with me. I mean, I agree. The proof of that is in the success every day of our businesses and our agencies working together. I mean, that's the proof of the culture change and the innovation. Yeah, yeah.
What do you do to accelerate that? What do you do in an environment, especially where you've got ideas going and information going a ton of different directions? As the threat landscape continues to evolve and accelerate, you've got to keep up with it, try to stay ahead of it. How do you do that?
Well, as your panel before us explained, you do have to have a good strategy. And, our strategy is to continue to evolve. And the FBI, in particular, developed systems and took a break. Then we would do another big waterfall development and take a break. And we learned there were mistakes and we made errors. So our goal is to continue to look at software algorithms, to look at the hardware of our systems and make sure that we're using new technology so we can prevent, crime and terrorism.
Last couple of minutes, and I'm going to do this is for you, Kimberly. I'm going to do what I hate when other people do, which is talk in buzzwords. We've heard a couple of them today: big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of that. Give me just a minute and a half or 2 minutes of how you expect to see those technologies improve the way that you do your work and that you interact with the other organizations that you interact with.
So today, the FBI is just looking at artificial intelligence. We have not implemented any AI at all. We are looking at machine learning and predictive analysis for our fire and background check process. I definitely think it's going to help us be more efficient. It'll be effective for us from a resource perspective. We don't really know yet what the advantages are going to be for us, since we're just at the beginning stages of that.
I want to thank you both for this conversation. I really appreciate an opportunity to look at culture because it impacts the way that people deliver the transformation that we've talked about so far today. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.